what is the motive, as long as the goal is awakening. And we are seeing that. The evidence is there. And that is why on the other side, these sorcerers, you see, have to then turn up the faucet on their side also.
Right.
They're not going to sit by, you see, while this kind of psychological change takes place.
The pace of it all has just increased so much.
Yeah,
and,
you increase the frequency.
It's
but let's never
sense of
forget
panic, right? I mean,
that's right. And threat. Remember, haven't they held that whole pyramid together with a bunch of promissory notes? Haven't they given decorations and silly medals and stupid letters after the name to all these punks? Everyone wanting to have their face on Time magazine or whatever garbage, you know, or a better seat on some other leviathan of evil. Oxford, Cambridge is full of it, full of the psychophantasm and full of that arrogance, the preposterous arrogance. The whole thing is rotten to the core. Knowledge pays no part. What knowledge? It's ego. It's vanity. And it's the idea that they own knowledge. Now, I'm not saying that you don't have this within the alternative community as well. That's what I've been talking about earlier. You have it wall to wall throughout the bloody world. I get emails from all sorts of arrogant, you know, these people always trying to, you know, point the finger or nitpick on some minor area of my work, you see. And I understand what's underneath it. Because I understand that greater than hatred, greater than any other emotion that exists in the world, envy is the key emotion. And maybe one day we can do a whole show just on that emotion. But in my world and in my vision of the world, envy is a very, 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 very key emotion to study, and it's different than jealousy.
From talks with John Lash about the Archons, the main motivation of the Archons, he said, that was written in the Gnostic literature, was envy.
I didn't know that. Is that right?
Yeah, he says the most clear definition of the motivation of the Archons, he says, is envy, and that they don't act in sensible ways. People wonder, well, what's this? Are they trying to take over? What are they trying to do? He says that in the Gnostic writings, their motivation is envy, but they don't operate by any kind of goal at all. He says all they want to do is fuck with our minds.
Well, okay, then, I would endorse that 100%. And since we're on the subject of envy, I will add one more anecdote to expand on it so people understand. They need to understand specifically what I meant when I said that envy is not jealousy. Jealousy is not a vice, really, ultimately. And the reason is this. If you see Jimmy Page playing a beautiful rosewood double-neck Gibson SG, you might go, what a lucky bugger, look at that guitar, I'd like one. And I know because I've said it many times. I go, yeah, I love that guitar.
Look at that.
But that doesn't mean that you don't want him to have it.
Yeah.
All of me, jealousy is just, oh, look at my neighbor's lawn, look at that, you know, or look at that Camaro, or that, you know, Viper he just bought. Jesus, I'd love one of those. Look at that guitar, it's magic, I'd love one of those. That's jealousy, but you're not saying that but jealousy can also be a celebration of the fact that Jimmy Page owns that guitar and he plays it really well. Or that your neighbor has that amazing car and he bloody well deserves it for all the hard work he's put in. Envy, on the other hand, which is why it's so pernicious, and I'm not surprised that you tell me now that it's been in the Gnostic Gospels, envy is very deep. Envy is very deep, and I don't think people in the world are that savvy to it at all. I don't think their antenna is as up on envy as it is on other, you know, pernicious vices like greed and hatred and all of that. I believe envy outranks them all, and the reason is this. When you're envious of somebody who has something you want, and it can be a mental trait or it can be physical objects, you want it, but you don't want the other person to have it. What really hurts you is that person has it, or that person's good at it, or that person, you see, was worthy of it, or that person received it, or whatever, or that this person has come up with it on their own. Envy is where and envy is so dark, Adam, that you would even destroy that Gibson SG, and you would even go about not having it yourself, and even destroying all the Gibson double-neck SGs in the world, just so that he couldn't have it.
Right.
That's the difference. And people need to think about this, because there are people beside you, people walking around you, who really, really strongly have this kind of envy. And we have it, as you've just pointed out, in the scriptures, talking about the top forces there's this element within their brain. And so you see, and the place that you'll find it the most, even though a physical crime that you can take into court may not be attending the envy, doesn't make it any less of a crime. You're going to find it in the halls of the academica. And you see, one of the problems with this alternative movement, as we progress down the line, is that we may have this backlash in the so-called academic world, in which these academic types start to fear and start to really, you know, get antsy about the fact that the Alex Joneses and David Icks and Michael Cremos, you see, and other people, other writers, who granted, their books are not done by major publishers in the world. Their books are more speculative. Their research may be less rigorous, as is demanded in academia. I'm accepting all of that. They may have more error, quote unquote, in some of their books because they're not as rigorously, edited or researched, etc. Whatever. Well, that's only to be expected. But that is more than made up for by the scope and the brilliance of what these independent amateurs, you see, are discovering. The scope of it, which is not to be found in the academic world. So this is something that I'm foreseeing, you see, that the academic world is not just going to sit quiet. They didn't sit quiet when Augustus Laplanchion was unraveling all the mysteries of the Maya back in the early 1900s. They didn't sit quiet when Wilhelm Reich was analyzing and completely discovering the roots of all human sickness, connecting to the biotic and the bioenergetics. Right. They didn't pay any attention when Alexander Lowen, his prodigy, went on to elaborate on the whole bioenergetic theory of mankind. You see, they haven't listened to the Manuel Velikovskys and the Cummins Beaumonts and the McDarrys. None of these mavericks have ever been welcomed or ever been purveyed. In fact, it was before the advent of the internet, and even still, it's quite difficult to find these people's work. So, and there's many, many other examples that one can give of this kind of thing, where there's active suppression of the mavericks. Absolutely. And then there's this whole carnival, the circus of the academica, just mulling over the most meaningless garbage. They've never been able to get the bottom of anything that really matters. In fact, worse, now that we're into genes and we're into the science of the gene, you see, we have got some of the most pernicious people and the most pernicious mindsets operating again in one of the most vulnerable fields, in which again man is just a robot, man is just a cyborg, man is just a spiritual machine we can turn on and off under the pretext of making his life easier and his health better and all of this other malarkey. Look at the absolute horror of all of that, and the ideologies and philosophies that are now again being endorsed and purveyed, and millions of dollars. It would be okay if they just were sitting there and nobody funded them or took them seriously. We wouldn't be having this conversation. It wouldn't matter what these maniacs thought. But the problem is, the whole royal societies of the world are endorsing these people, and the think tanks are endorsing them, and the millions of dollars that they're being given, billions of dollars, into these areas. That they, again, like I said, all academics believe that they are masters of the game, that knowledge is something they own. They're like territorial. Yeah. They're exactly the same as some wrestler who's territorializing the ring. These people do not want to have, they're so arrogant and they're envious. Not one of them understands that knowledge is the, as I'll say this so many times, knowledge is the forte of all. Knowledge is not owned by a society. It doesn't have a logo. It doesn't have a stamp on it. It doesn't have a royal seal or a watermark on it. It doesn't have a hallmark, Knowledge is for you. It's for everybody. It's for anyone in the streets. Anyone. You don't have to, we've been trained to think in certain ways about knowledge and about observation. But the world of knowledge can be completely changed by one individual, by one child, by one prodigy, by one seeker. It's a matrix that anyone can get into and investigate and come to any kind of understanding. And it doesn't have to be circumvented by rightness and wrongness and, awards and flowers and speeches and all of this kind of thing. Knowledge is there for every human mind to investigate and discover by simple acts of observation and study. And the hell with all of these, colleges and universities and think tanks who, the whole meritocratic system that's just rotten. Look at Russell, right? What about Tesla?
Exactly.
Right? What about Walter Russell and Nikola Tesla, you see? And so many other great geniuses. The list goes on within the field of mathematics, within the field of archaeology, within the field of history. Edward Gibbon. Edward Gibbon is one of the greatest historians. He never received no damn knighthood or some letters after his name and all of this nonsense, you see. So we have mavericks in every field. And again, it goes to the heart of what I'm saying. And I hope that in the future it's going to be more so, that people get the guts to take on and handle some very large, difficult academic type subjects. And they feel that, hey, I don't need all of that rubbish. I can go to libraries, I can look on the internet, I can find things out for myself. I don't need to have a big agenda for doing that or anything like that. I want to find out. I have a love of knowledge, a love of wisdom. In all my work I am always pointing this out, that philosophy meant love of wisdom, not gaining of wisdom, gaining of knowledge. And gaining knowledge any idiot can do. But falling in love with knowledge, falling in love with wisdom and the process that it takes, this is what is lacking in our world today, you see. We don't have the passion. We have the vanity, we have the envy, we have the jealousy, we have all of these other things. But we don't have the love anymore for wisdom, for knowledge. That exists in very few people. And that's why those people who have now fallen out of love, what is the consequence of that? Well, it's orcdom. We're the orcs.
Yeah.
We're the people who sit there passively and just allow Big Brother, the media, to tell us what we're meant to believe, show us where to go, because we have no passion, no spirit, no energy left. We've basically debauched ourselves. Our minds have been completely raped, you see, and debauched. And parents are complicit in this, just as are the priests and the politicians as well. So there has to be a restoration. And the restoration is the Holy Spirit, the descent of the true Holy Spirit. It is the movement of the planet Pluto, or at least what Pluto represents, you see. It's this new understanding, and it is the Mother Nature rushing in to save her gormless kids from suicide by, eating stuff that's just so wrong for them. And we are people who are just gobbling down the sugar, because it's sweet. And it can end up, destroying us, poisoning ourselves. This is the narcissistic, society that we find ourselves in today. But again, the ultimate solution is an individual one. It can only be an individual one. Because if it isn't an individual motivation, then it's pure tyranny. Because not me and no one else in this world should tell another person what to do, think, or say. As soon as you have that, you have another form of tyranny, however mild. All change must not be compelled. If it's compelled, then I'm sorry, but you've just reinvented the tyrant again. Maybe not as on a biggest level, but it's the same old thing. It's the same old thing that happens in the schoolroom. It's the same old tyranny of thou shalt not. Do as I say, not as I do, which happens in every household with the parents. You see, so in this alternative community, in the seeking for truth, there can be no authority. There can be no path, fixed path. There can be no compulsion at all. It has to be simply the most organic, most natural, most unaffected, and most unadulterated thing in your life. And therefore, it cannot be motivated out of any ego or vanity or material need or anything like that. It has to be motivated from a totally different center, a completely instinctual thing.